In a world teetering on the edge of uncertainty, where power often roars louder than reason, a single man stood still, and then he spoke, not with weapons, not with wrath, but with one word, a word so precise, so piercing, it echoed across oceans and shook the very halls of Washington. In the realm of global diplomacy, words are not merely sounds. They are signals, calculated, measured, and delivered with intention. The difference between conflict and consensus, between chaos and cooperation, often lies not in speeches full of fury, but in a single sentence, or sometimes a single word. Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister, has time and again demonstrated a rare mastery of this art, the power of precision in diplomacy. His delivery is never flamboyant, never careless, but beneath the composed tone and composed demeanor lies a tactical mind that understands how much weight a well-placed word can carry. When Jaishankar speaks, the world listens, not because he demands attention, but because he commands it. In an age where global leaders often rely on theatricality, sound bites, and dramatic declarations to make headlines, Jaishankar takes the road less traveled. His approach is scalpel sharp, deliberately controlled, and fiercely intelligent. In a recent instance that caught the eyes and ears of the global political community, one word from Jaishankar was enough to send ripples across the American media and political circles. It wasn't loud, it wasn't hostile, it was accurate, and it was devastating. This moment illustrates a fundamental truth about modern statecraft. Diplomacy is not about volume, it's about value. A word that carries cultural, political, or historical significance, spoken at the right time, in the right setting, can destabilize assumptions, reveal hypocrisies, and shift power balances. That's exactly what Jaishankar did. He didn't lecture. He didn't insult. He simply inserted one word into the conversation, and that word became the fulcrum on which the narrative turned. Precision in diplomacy is like a chess move made 5 turns in advance. It's never accidental. Jaishankar doesn't waste words. Every phrase is chosen. Every pause is planned. His style is that of a man who knows the stakes of every statement, the geopolitical implications of every metaphor. And because of that, even the most powerful nations accustomed to dominating the narrative find themselves suddenly unbalanced when he speaks. He speaks softly, but what he says often echoes longer than the loudest critics. One of the greatest assets in international relations is restraint, and Jaishankar has it in abundance. He doesn't respond to provocation with provocation. He responds with perspective, and in that calm, he disarms his opponents, exposing the gaps in their logic without ever raising his voice. Precision becomes the weapon. Diplomacy becomes the battlefield. And the outcome is often determined before the other side realizes the game has even begun. India's rise as a confident global player has been marked not just by economic growth or military strength, but by a distinct transformation in how it asserts itself diplomatically. Jaishankar embodies this evolution. He doesn't seek validation, he offers clarity. He doesn't chase approval, he delivers reality. And this subtlety, this unshakable calm, is what makes his words more powerful than the most impassioned protest. The media often gravitates toward outrage, toward explosions and confrontations. But in Jaishankar's hands, diplomacy becomes something far more elegant. It becomes a form of art. The way a poet selects words for emotional resonance, he selects them for strategic impact. A single word, in his voice, becomes a message, a signal, and sometimes a verdict. His mastery lies not just in what he says, but in what he does not need to say. And when that one word, sharp as a blade, silent as a shadow, was released, it did not come wrapped in aggression. It came with precision. It sliced through layers of pretension, reached the heart of the issue, and forced a moment of reckoning. That's the true measure of diplomatic power, not in the volume of one's declarations, but in the silence that follows a precise one. This is the kind of leadership that defines new eras, not through force, but through finesse, not through domination, but through definition. In Jaishankar, we are witnessing a new diplomatic doctrine where a single word can carry the weight of a nation and change the temperature of the room. The world is beginning to understand that diplomacy is not about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most meaningful in the theater of international politics. Narratives are not merely stories. They're tools of influence, weapons of perception, carefully constructed myths that shape global power dynamics. For decades, dominant powers have told these stories, casting themselves as heroes, arbiters of morality, champions of democracy. But every so often, someone steps onto the stage who doesn't just question the script, they burn it with a single word. That is exactly what Dr. S. Jaishankar did. In a moment of calculated calm, he uttered a word so deliberate, so incisive, it fractured the carefully curated narrative spun by the very powers that believe themselves untouchable. The brilliance of such a moment lies not in the volume, but in the velocity. The word doesn't scream, it pierces. It bypasses debates and dismantles decades of diplomatic hypocrisy in a breath. For a long time, the global South has been expected to play a supporting role, deferential, compliant, apologetic. But when Jaishankar stood before the microphones, before the cameras, before the questions, laced with condescension, he didn't argue, he didn't explain, he inserted one word that snapped the illusion in two, and suddenly the empire had no clothes. This was not just a clever response. It was a moment of reclaiming narrative power, of flipping the script in real time. Words are not equal in diplomacy. Some words in the mouths of some men carry the weight of 100 speeches. That's what made this word so potent. It wasn't simply a rebuttal, it was an exposure. In that one word, Jaishankar revealed the double standards, the historical amnesia, and the selective outrage that often colors Western foreign policy. And in doing so, he didn't just defend India, he redefined the moment. To shatter a narrative with a single word is an act of strategic genius. It demands emotional intelligence, historical depth, cultural awareness, and tactical restraint. It's knowing that in a world where the West often controls the headlines, the most effective resistance is not yelling louder, it's speaking sharp. It's knowing that perception is power and clarity is ammunition. And when Jaishankar dropped that word into the room, the atmosphere changed. Journalists paused, analysts scrambled, diplomats recalculated. Because they understood what had just happened, the veil had been lifted, if only for a moment, and the story would never quite be the same. There are times in history when a nation finds its voice, but even rarer are the moments when a single voice shifts the global tone. This was one of them. The usual questions thrown at Indian representatives, loaded with implications, dripping with bias, had met a different India this time. An India that would not entertain moral lectures from those with blood on their own hands. An India that understood history not as a burden, but as a teacher. And a foreign minister who knew how to wield language like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. The genius of that single word was that it did not need explanation. It didn't plead. It didn't protest. It left the question hanging, unanswered, yet obliterated. It exposed the imbalance without even referencing it directly. It echoed in silence because silence is often louder than spin. When power expects compliance and receives clarity instead, it doesn't know how to react. And in that confusion, in that stunned moment, narratives begin to crumble. Western media often prides itself on framing the global South through a lens of dependency or dysfunction. But Jaishankar's word was not a correction. It was a confrontation, a mirror held up to power with unshakable steadiness. And the reflection it revealed was not flattering. That's the danger of precision. It cannot be spun. It cannot be diluted. It cuts straight through the noise and names what others dare not. This moment, subtle in delivery but seismic in impact, reminded the world that dominance in diplomacy is no longer guaranteed by military might or economic leverage alone. It is earned through authenticity, confidence, and clarity. But one word, Jaishankar showed that India is no longer a listener in the global conversation. It is a speaker, a challenger, and most importantly, a narrator of its own story. For decades, India's voice on the global stage was either drowned out, diluted, or dismissed. It was filtered through the lens of foreign correspondence, lost in the echo chambers of Western media, all framed in the language of charity, poverty, and potential, always potential, never presence. But something has shifted, something unmistakable. A new voice is emerging, not louder but clearer, not aggressive but unyielding, not seeking approval but asserting presence. That voice is India's, and one of its most commanding vassals is Dr. S. Jaishankar. When Jaishankar speaks, he doesn't just represent a country, he redefines its image. His words are not tailored to appease the global West, nor are they crafted for applause. They are calibrated to reflect a nation that no longer sees itself as peripheral to world affairs. His confidence is not arrogance. It is the natural posture of a country that understands its worth, its weight, and its window of opportunity. Through his articulation, India is no longer being spoken about, it is speaking for itself. For far too long, India's participation in global dialogue was marked by restraint, cautious diplomacy, softened responses, and the politics of silence. But the world has changed. In India, with its demographic power, digital innovation, cultural capital, and rising economic influence, is no longer content with courtesy over clarity. What Jaishankar represents is not just a minister with a sharp tongue and a sharper mind. He embodies a recalibration of India's geopolitical language, from polite patience to strategic assertion. Every time he steps onto an international platform, he breaks the mold of how Indian officials are expected to behave. Gone is the excessive deference. In its place stands calm confrontation. He doesn't interrupt, but he doesn't let bias slide. He doesn't provoke, but he never retreats from a challenge. Whether he's sitting across from Western journalists, policy think tanks, or multilateral forums, Jaishankar carries himself like a man who knows that history is turning, and this time, India holds a pen. This redefinition isn't about vanity, it's about vision. India is increasingly shaping narratives rather than reacting to them. And it's doing so without needing to mirror the West or seek its validation. That is a radical act in itself. In a world where global leadership is often equated with military muscle or financial firepower, India is making its case through diplomacy that is grounded, proud, and unapologetic. Through Jaishankar's voice, the world is learning that humility is not the same as submission, and clarity is not hostility. One of the most remarkable aspects of this transformation is the tone. It's not theatrical, not bombastic, it's composed. But within that calm lies the unmistakable edge of a nation that remembers colonial humiliation, media bias, and decades of one-sided moral lectures, and has decided that enough is enough. The era of India as a passive recipient of global opinion is over. A new era has begun, one where India speaks back, and not just speaks back, but speaks first, speaks firm, and speaks with facts. This shift in voice also reflects a broader confidence within the Indian public. Citizens are more globally aware, more assertive in their identity, and more connected than ever before. They expect their leaders to represent them, not with timidity, but with truth. Jaishankar taps into that sentiment. He doesn't speak above the people, he channels them. When he challenges hypocrisy, when he dismantles doublespeak, when he returns fire with facts, he's not just performing on a diplomatic stage. He's echoing the thoughts of a billion people who are done being patronized. His voice, articulate, unapologetic, and razor sharp, is altering perceptions. India is not a side character in someone else's story. It is not an emerging player waiting in the wings. It is a civilization state with its own compass, its own priorities, and its own tempo. Through Jaishankar, that message is being delivered not with fists, but with force. The kind of force that doesn't shake tables, it reshapes them. And that is how a nation redefines itself. Not by begging for attention, but by earning respect. Not by shouting over others, but by speaking so clearly that silence becomes agreement. With every statement, every rebuttal, every word, India is redrawing its place in the global dialogue. Not as a follower, not as a pawn, but as a peer. For years, India's posture on the world stage was marked by a kind of cautious silence, a deep-rooted instinct to avoid confrontation, to seek balance, to stay diplomatic even in the face of blatant double standards. That silence was a weakness. It was restraint. It was a choice of a country healing from centuries of colonization, navigating a bipolar world and building its foundations brick by brick. But silence has a shelf life. And now that quiet reserve has evolved into something far more potent, confident leadership. Leadership that no longer whispers in rooms dominated by louder powers, but instead sends shockwaves that change the tone of the conversation entirely. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was years in the making, forged in the fires of political maturity, economic ambition, and a deep collective yearning to be heard on equal footing. Today, India doesn't just show up at global summits to nod along. It challenges, it questions, it calls out hypocrisy with surgical precision. At the center of this transformation stands leaders like Dr. S. Jaishankar, calm, composed, but undeniably commanding. He doesn't raise his voice, yet somehow every word lands like thunder. Confident leadership, especially in diplomacy, is not about aggression. It's not about volume or theatrics. It's about knowing who you are and making sure the world knows it too. Jaishankar exemplifies this. His confidence doesn't come from titles or applause. It comes from clarity. Clarity about India's history, its trajectory, and its right to speak for itself without external filters. And when that kind of leadership speaks, even the most powerful nations take notice. Not because they're threatened, but because they're surprised. India was never supposed to talk back. Not like this, not with this much conviction, not with this much weight. From silence to shockwaves. That's the arc of India's new global identity. What once was a reactive nation, carefully towing the line between East and West, is now a proactive force, unafraid to disrupt, to question, to lead. And the shockwaves don't come from provocations, they come from truths. When Jaishankar uses one word to dismantle the biased question, or when he outlines foreign policy without parroting anyone's script, it's not just India that feels seen. It's an entire world of emerging voices, long suppressed, finding strength in his tone. There's a rhythm to this new leadership, deliberate, composed, unapologetic. It's not brash nationalism, it's strategic self-respect. And it's powerful because it refuses to be baited into emotional overreactions. It operates from a place of certainty, the certainty of a nation that has studied the game long enough to know the rules and now confidently bends them to serve its interests. The rise of confident leadership in India also reflects a shift in mindset at home. The Indian public is no longer content with passive diplomacy. They expect representation that mirrors their pride, their aspirations, and their frustrations. They want their leaders to push back when unfairly targeted, to speak boldly when their sovereignty is questioned, and to do so without compromising the dignity of the country. Jaishankar doesn't just fulfill that expectation, he elevates it. He proves that true leadership doesn't need validation from the usual centers of power. It draws strength from truth, history, and an unwavering commitment to national interest. And this confidence has ripple effects. It forces a recalibration of how India is perceived, not as a junior partner, not as a balancing act, but as a sovereign force with its own center of gravity. When India responds to criticism with facts, when it challenges sanctions with logic, when it refuses to pick sides in other people's wars, it sends a message that this is a country capable of thinking for itself, leading itself, and shaping the future of others too. From silence to shockwaves, it's not just a transformation in tone, but in strategy, identity, and global positioning. It's a signal to the world that the age of one-sided storytelling is ending, that emerging powers like India will no longer wait to be invited into the room. They'll walk in, take their seat, and speak in a voice that cannot be ignored. That voice is now confident, and that confidence is contagious.